We're live on YouTube, live on Facebook. Hello, everyone. Chuck Jones here from The Chuck Jones Show. Steve is unavailable this evening, and I'm going to talk about that when I start the show, and I'm just going to start the show right here now.
It is Wednesday, my dudes.
Listening to The Chuck Jones Show. Talk radio just for you. This is an iHeartRadio podcast. And now, quarantined away somewhere in Northeast Ohio, live from the Discount Wheelie Studio, here's your hosts, Chuck Jones and Steve.
All right, welcome to The Chuck Jones Show. We are Steveless. We are Steveless at the moment. Steve called me about an hour ago, said he's having a plumbing problem in his apartment and was causing him, I think he said his sink, turn the music down, I think his sink was backing up, and apparently it sounded like something that he couldn't just let go. He said he was taking buckets of water from the kitchen to the bathroom. So Steve is preoccupied. He said he's going to try and make it. I sent him an invite, so if he gets finished up and he can join us, he'll join us. But the show must go on, the Chuck Jones Show. And I almost didn't even do a show tonight because of everything that's gone on since last Wednesday in this country. I almost felt like I had so much to say and so many opinions about it that I felt like I probably shouldn't even start talking. But I'm here, I'm doing a show, and I got something that I'm going to do that I think is a little different for this show. But before I do that, let me tell you, we're live on Podbean, YouTube, and Facebook. Thanks, everyone that's joining us, our usual suspects. Thank you, Michelle. I'm sure Anchor will be along soon. Hopefully our Facebook fans will show up. If not, they can listen to it on the download, chuckjonesshow.com. So I was watching a video on Facebook. I was actually watching it when Steve called me. I was just got home from work, let the dog out, fed the dog, let the dog out. And I was watching this video that someone shared. Michelle said, "What, is something going on?" Yeah. I almost didn't do a show tonight because there's just nothing to talk about. I mean, there's nothing going on, so yeah, that was the running joke all week. Every time I saw Steve, I was like, I don't even know if we should do a show. I mean, it's going to be boring. What are we going to talk about? But what was I saying? Oh, I was watching this Facebook video that someone had shared from a Gloria's joined us. Thanks for joining us. Someone had shared. So I was watching this video, and he called me, and then I answered the phone, and then I went back to the video. And by the time I was done watching this video, I thought to myself, okay, this is it. This is what tonight's show is going to basically be about. And what the show is going to be about is what's going on in the country with, the riots and all that. Our good buddy, the Face of Dave, which I was going to bring this up so I could read it verbatim, and I forgot, but it'll only take me a second, messaged me. And Dave, you should know if you DM me, I may talk about what you DM me on the show, okay? So if you DM me something and you don't want it on the show, you better tell me. Dave said, "I'm preemptively asking you not to talk about George Floyd." And when I read that, I thought to myself, that's not a problem. I just, this was a couple days ago, yesterday. I was already wore out by yesterday. And again, I thought, I have too much to say and that are just my opinions. So maybe I shouldn't say anything. And I responded, well, that's kind of a big request. I can't make any promises, but I'll see what I can or cannot do. He said, just don't say anything that would make me abandon ship. And I assume he means by abandon ship as in not listen to my show anymore. Which, Dave, I mean, if I ever say anything that's that offensive, please, I mean, feel free to not listen. It's okay. There would be no hard feelings. Dave and I are pretty, I think, polarized on opposite ends of a political spectrum, and that's okay. That's fine. But if you don't want to listen, don't listen. That's okay. I am not going to talk about George Floyd. I'm going to let someone else talk about George Floyd. And the reason I'm going to do this, I'm going to play a video clip of a young lady who posted her video on Facebook. She's a young African-American lady who posted her opinion. And all of the past 3 days, I've been thinking to myself, what, like I just said, it's so much that I would want to say about this, and so much I would want to express my opinion on. I do a podcast, and I do it for a reason. I like to express my opinion on some things. But ever since this thing went down, which we don't even need to talk about whether the police officers were right or wrong. They were wrong. 100% wrong. They murdered a man. Whether he deserved it or not, he didn't deserve it. Obviously, he did not deserve it. But that's not even the discussion now. That's gone. Anybody who is still discussing that is a complete racist or just mentally ill. But I thought, what am I going to say? What would I say? What should I say? And the one thing that kept striking me as I was watching all these horrific Twitter videos and Facebook posts of what's gone on in the major cities in our country the last 5, 6, 7 days, the same thing that kept going through my mind over and over was, what right do I have to say anything about it? I'm a middle-aged white man who grew up in a fairly white neighborhood. Wasn't completely white. I grew up in just outside the city limits of Akron, Ohio, which is not a big city, but it's not a small city. We have a fairly large African-American community, and I grew up in a neighborhood that was basically 6 doors down from where the quote-unquote black neighborhood started. So I went to school with African-American kids. I grew up with African-American friends and enemies, but for the most part, I'm your basic middle-aged white American male who has no right to say anything about what African Americans have gone through in this country. Now, I can tell you one thing. I'm a student of history. I've always loved history since I was very young. Early teens, I started being interested in history, the Civil War, the Revolution. And my interest expanded beyond just one topic or one era. And I go through phases where I'll be very interested in one specific era of history. And I went through a phase where I was very interested in the history of African Americans. So I'm by no means an expert on African American history, but I have been enough immersed in it to have it get deep inside of me and bring me to tears, realizing what some people have gone through in this country, not just in slavery. Slavery was terrible, but that's a whole different animal. But what they've gone through after slavery and after Reconstruction, after the Civil Rights Movement, it's unconscionable, and there's never any way that any white person could ever make up for it. Probably one of the most egregious things that our society had done to African Americans is how we treated our heroic World War II soldiers, African American soldiers, when they came back. You could never, there's no amount of money you could pay the descendants of those men who suffered after going to Europe and fighting for their country. So basically what I was saying is I have no right, I can't express an opinion that matters. And I feel like I'm watching all these white people at these protests and at these rallies yelling and screaming and expressing their opinion, and I'm sure that most or maybe all African Americans appreciate the gesture, but I look at it like, let the people affected speak. So that's what I'm going to do here. This video that I'm about to show, and the audio will be fine. If you're listening to the audio podcast, you don't need to see the video, is I'm going to let someone who has a right to speak to this, speak to it. It's kind of long. It's almost 18 minutes, but it's a speech that everybody in this country should at least hear and at least consider what she's saying. Now, everybody has their opinions, and everybody will have something to say about her upbringing or her background or blah, blah, blah. Like I said, everybody has opinions. Everybody will say this or that or the other. But like I said, I believe what she has to say should at least be heard by everyone and considered. And I'm playing it because she is saying 99.9% of what I feel and what I think is, from my perspective and my point of view, correct. So instead of me saying it, I'm going to let her say it. Her name is Candace Owens, by the way. I've never heard of her before about 2 hours ago when I found this video.
Hello, Facebook family. I have decided to do this video. It has been weighing very heavily on my heart and on my mind as well. And it was something that I wanted to say early on, but there were so many emotions and so much pressure for me to go with the popular opinion about who George Floyd was. And sometimes it can be difficult when there are just so many external pressures to say what you believe. And this was an instance where I felt like my silence would have been better in the beginning, but the more that I think about it, I realize that we are being sold a lot of lies, and at the detriment to the Black community, at the detriment to the white community, and at the detriment to America as a whole. So I want to come out and say that I do not support George Floyd and the media depiction of him as a martyr for Black America. I'm going to explain why, and I hope that some of you guys will understand where I'm coming from. I have spent a considerable amount of time reading a lot of Black authors that I think are some of the most brilliant Black Americans breathing. Walter Williams, Shelby Steele, Thomas Sowell, and I recently came across something that was an idea that was planted into my head by Shelby Steele, and it has been something that I cannot forget. It is something that will stick with me for the rest of my life. And it is something that I hope for the Black Americans that are watching will stick with you for the rest of your life. Shelby Steele said that the Black community is unique from other communities. Our culture is unique from other communities because we are the only community that caters to the bottom denominator of our society. Now, let me explain what that means. It means to say that not every Black American is a criminal, not every Black American is committing crimes, but we are unique in that we are the only people that fight and scream and demand support and justice for the people in our community that are up to no good. You would be hard pressed to find, a Jewish person who has spent 5 stints in prison, who commits a crime and dies while committing a crime, and that the Jewish people champion and demand justice for. You will be hard pressed to find this in white America. You'll be hard pressed to find this even in Latino America. If there is a person that is spent multiple times in prison, you are not going to see a bunch of Latinos coming out demanding justice for this person, even if, and I want to be very clear, what I'm saying is not any defense for Derek Chauvin. I hope Derek Chauvin gets the justice that he deserves to be, implemented upon him, and that the family of George Floyd deserves justice for the way that he died. But I also am not going to accept the narrative that this is the best the Black community has to offer. For whatever reason, it has become fashionable over the last 5 or 6 years for us to turn criminals into heroes overnight. And it is something that I find to be despicable, and it is something that I refuse to stand by any longer, and I am not going to play a part in it, no matter how much pressure comes from Black liberals and Black conservatives as some token of people wanting you to believe that this is the only way you can be Black, is you have to say this was wrong and that this person was amazing. I won't do that. George Floyd was not an amazing person, and as soon as this video hit the internet, I did just basic searches. Everyone jumped on it and was looking at the police officer, and everyone agrees that the police officer was wrong, and the police officer has been arrested. So that is not the reason I'm not discussing that, is because that is not something that has been misconstrued in the media. He has been turned into the devil that he is, and there is no reason for us to harp on that any longer, because white Americans are not uplifting Derek Chauvin as a victim or pretending that he's an amazing human being. But George Floyd is being uplifted as an amazing human being. For those of you who have not yet seen the clips and did not pursue or wait for more clips to come out, first and foremost, George Floyd at the time of his arrest was high on fentanyl, and he was high on methamphetamine. This came back in both of his autopsy reports. If you pursue the 911 transcript, you can see the person describing somebody who is out of their mind high, and which is what made the person fearful, because he tried to use a bill that I guess was a fake bill to purchase something, and then he was outside acting weird, and they, in their police call, said that this person was obviously distorted and on drugs. When he is put into handcuffs and is put against the wall, a baggie of what looks to be like cocaine or it's a white baggie that he drops onto the floor that you can see in an image. If you look up the clip, the media is refusing to circulate it. You can find it on Twitter. If you use DuckDuckGo and look up George Floyd baggie, you can watch the clip yourself with your own eyes. He had drugs on him at the time of his arrest. Now, barring all of that, nobody thinks that he should have died during this arrest, but what I find despicable to be is that everyone is pretending that this man lived a heroic lifestyle when he didn't, and I want to talk about what his lifestyle was leading up to this moment, and why I refuse to accept the narrative that this person is a martyr or should be lifted up in the Black community, and that we should be buying t-shirts with his name on it, okay? So here we have, first and foremost, let's start from the bottom of his record. And by the way, I am not saying that if you have a record, you don't deserve a second chance. I think people get arrested, and some people can serve time in prison, and I believe in second chances, but I do draw the line when it comes to second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, and ninth chances. 1998, he spent 10 months in prison for theft with a firearm. That was the first prison stint that I could find on him. In 2002, he spent 8 months in prison for a cocaine offense. In 2004, just 2 years later, he spent another 10 months in prison for a cocaine offense. In 2005, he spent another 10 months in prison for having less than 1 gram of cocaine on him again. In 2007, and this was the biggest instant that I had that made me realize this was a horrible human being that I am not going to pretend was a good person. In 2005, a woman who was pregnant received a knock at the door, and she went to the door, and the person pretended to be someone that worked for the water department. So she opened her door and quickly realized that the person at her door did not work for the water department, and attempted to slam it. At the moment that she was attempting to slam it, a Ford pulled up, and another 5 men jumped out of the car, and one of which was George Floyd, came up to the door, and they forced their way inside to her home, inside of her home. Mind you, this woman is pregnant. At that point, George Floyd took out a gun and pressed it to her stomach. She was screaming, begging for her life, and he put her inside of her living room and instructed one of his criminal friends that was with him to watch her and to make sure she didn't leave the living room. So he was playing guard while they ransacked her home looking for drugs and money. They did not find drugs. They ended up taking, I believe, her wallet and her cell phone. Fortunately for her, her neighbor observed what was going on and caught the license plate of the people as they pulled off and called 911. And when 911 was able to, they were able to track down the car of which George Floyd was the driver, and they arrested him. And 2 years later, he was sentenced to 5 years in prison for that instance. Now, you can say the media is portraying it like he was just getting his life together after, being released in 2014 following that incident. He was just getting his life together and moved and was going to start afresh. I'd like to believe all of those things, and there's a gap, and he never got in trouble for 5 years until this incident when the police were called on him again. But you are defying common sense to believe that this person suddenly became an exemplary character but happened to be high on fentanyl and methamphetamine and trying to use a bill, a fake bill, to purchase something. And so, in my opinion, George Floyd was a criminal. He was a criminal. And just because he was a criminal doesn't mean he deserved to die at the knee of a police officer. But it does mean that I am not going to play a part of the broken Black culture that always wants to martyr criminals, who wants to pretend they were these upstanding human beings that just wanted to help society, that just wanted to reach out and uplift society. And he has a rap sheet that is long, that is dangerous. He was an example of a violent criminal his entire life. Okay, up until the very last moment. Now, again, I want to be clear. This is not a defense for Derek Chauvin. No one that I have spoken to, no one in the news is defending Derek Chauvin. He is getting what he has coming to him. Okay, great. But why are we pretending that this criminal should be upheld as a citizen, as a martyr in Black America? A martyr for a fake narrative, by the way. Police brutality, racially motivated police brutality, is a myth. Okay, so let's get into that. Not only are we using this death, right, and allowing it to cause these riots and protests, pretending this was some upstanding citizen in the Black community who was tackled down and killed for no reason, right? Not only are we allowing it to inspire riots in which Black people are dying, in which actual upstanding Black citizens are dying. Case in point, I'm sure you guys have all now seen David, the sheriff that just was shot and killed because he was trying to protect a pawn shop. Please look him up if you haven't seen it. I'm blanking on his last name. His first name is David, who was shot and killed for trying to protect a pawn shop from looters. An upstanding citizen, an actual head of he was the head of a police his entire life, 77 years old, did everything right? So we now have to kill upstanding Black citizens because a non-upstanding Black citizen, a career Black criminal, died. Now, did he deserve to die in that manner? No. I can't say it enough. No, he didn't deserve to die in that manner. But I will be damned if the rest of us upstanding Black citizens have to suffer because of this incident that rarely ever happens in America. So here are some numbers for you people that are still believing that police brutality is a real, racially motivated police brutality is a real thing. First and foremost, okay, you have a 25% higher chance as a violent white criminal of dying at the hands of a police officer than you do as a Black criminal. Last year, a total of 9 unarmed black men were killed by police officers, and 19 white men were killed by police officers. For those of you that aren't good at mathematics, right, you might be thinking, oh, but Candace, white people represent 60% of the population and Black people represent just 13% of the population. It doesn't matter what percentage of the population you represent. It matters what percentage of the violent criminal community you represent. And unfortunately, Black community commits a disproportionate amount of crimes compared to the white community. Let me tell you, 6% of the population, right, Black men, 6% of the population account for 44% of all murders in this country, according to 2018 statistics. That is what you call a gap. And yet white people who represent 60% of the population, we represent 13, Black men are 6%, only represent 50% of all the murders, right? That makes no sense. That makes no sense. A 6-point variation in a community where we are extreme minorities. We commit 50% of all violent offenses, evenly split, and we're only 13% of the population, okay? So we have a lot more encounters with police officers. And don't say the police officers are coming around because we're black. I'm talking about violent criminals. I'm talking about murder, 44% of murders, okay? You want to talk about real statistics? The police officers have way more to be fearful of in the black community than the other way around, okay? We commit, on average, a police officer is 18 and a half times more likely to be killed by a black person than the other way around. Okay, so this entire narrative is complete smoke and mirrors. It's all made up. It's just election fodder. It's white versus black because it's an election year, not because black Americans are suffering at the hands of police officers more than white Americans. Do some police officers do the wrong thing? Yes. I don't think there's anybody in the world who has not encountered a police officer and thought this person is an absolute jerk who is power tripping, whether you are black or white. We know they exist. And we know they're always going to exist, by the way, because they're human beings. And sometimes human beings suck. In fact, if you want to attack a community for accidental slayings or brutality, did you know that doctors accidentally kill 250,000 people every year because of mistakes? Did you know that there's been doctors that have been arrested for being serial killers that just were killing people because they wanted to? Do we protest and boycott doctors? Do we assume all doctors are horrible human beings because some doctors are? Or do we realize that society is not perfectible? People suck in every profession. It is no excuse to paint society with a broad brush. It is certainly no excuse to accept a Democrat narrative, okay, that black people are being disproportionately hunted down by police officers because of the color of their skin. You want to know the best way to avoid not being brutalized by a police officer is to limit the amount of encounters you need to have with them, especially when it comes to violent crimes. Okay? I am not going to stand for this continual bottom-feeding narrative of us martyring people that have had 5, 6, 7 stints in prison and then pretending they were upstanding heroes to our community. It's bullshit. It's bullshit. Excuse my language. It's absolute bullshit, and I'm tired of it. I'm tired of having to play pretend. I'm tired of sitting here and being called a coon or an Uncle Tom because I won't play this bottom-feeding game with you. If you want to hang up posters of criminals on your wall and talk about them as your martyrs, do it. Do it. You can do it. Kobe Bryant was my idol, okay? I'll keep a photo of Kobe Bryant. You can keep one of George Floyd and pretend he was an upstanding human being that just once or twice put a gun across a pregnant woman's belly. Could you imagine that woman right now? That black woman, by the way? Right? Watching everybody pretend this person was an upstanding human being who just at the age of 42 and 5 prison stints was going to get his life together. I mean, it's embarrassing. We are embarrassing in that regard, right? This is why we have a cycle and a toxic culture, because nobody wants to tell the truth in Black America. It's so easy to be a victim. It's so easy to ask white people to bow down and apologize and do all these things for us. It's crap. It's crap. It's a lie. It's a farce. Our biggest problem is us, okay? It's why we don't talk about it when black on black crime happens. It's why we don't talk about it when 40 black people are killed in one weekend during Memorial Weekend in Chicago. We don't want to talk about any of that stuff. We don't want to talk about Baltimore. We don't want to talk about New Jersey. We don't want to talk about any of these places where black people are being slaughtered by other blacks, because that would mean that we had to be personally accountable, right? That would mean personal responsibility. We don't do personal responsibility in our community. We don't do it. We blame white people. Right? We only point a camera to white people when they do something, even though we do it at a way higher rate to ourselves, right? We celebrate our drug dealers. We're the only community, right, that would ever create hashtags to free people from prison because they committed crimes, like free Meek Mill, free this rapper, free this rapper. How hard is it to not spend multiple times in prison? How difficult is that? Is that too hard for us? Is that way too high of a mountain for us to scale, to do the right thing, to be upstanding citizens? That is the call to action that I have for Black America with Blexit. Like, why do we keep fulfilling this narrative? What do you think the perception of us, by the way, is on the outside? You ever look at the comments? You ever go into like an anonymous blog and see what people say? Oh, just black people being black people. I see those racist comments. Oh, just black people got to riot. Black people got to be black people. You know how they are. Oh, just black people being ignorant. That is the perception when people get to be anonymous and talk about us. That's what they think about us, right? They think that we are the kind of people that will forever uphold criminals as the martyrs of our society, that we will never take account for the things that we do wrong, right? That we don't have it within us to educate ourselves to get ahead. And that for those of us that actually do it, well, we get called coons, right? You got Condoleezza Rice, she's a coon. Larry Elder, he's a coon. Dr. Ben Carson, brain surgeon, first ever to perform the surgery of splitting twins that are connected by the head. He's a coon, right? What a loser he is. What a stupid guy he is. Kanye West says he's not going to be told to do it because of the color of his skin. He's a coon. He's lost. He's in the sunken place. The sunken place. That's where we all are, right? Because we demand more and we will get more out of this society because we're going to get ahead, right? That's what's going to happen. We're going to get ahead. Black conservatives get ahead because we don't subscribe to this narrative. Because you're not going to catch me outside trying to grab a TV pretending that it's because a martyr named George Floyd got killed. Okay? I'm a big believer that no matter what color you are, you do stupid things, you win stupid prizes. Okay? We have to do better. We have to teach our kids better, or we're not going to get ahead, right? Anyways, this is just a rant because I have been feeling super, super, super annoyed at these depictions in society. I have no apologies here to make. George Floyd is not my martyr. He can be yours. That's all I have to say to Black America.
Wow. Right? Am I right? Wow. Sorry about that. Of course, the next video played. That's how it goes, right? So she said everything that I've been thinking, and I thought, I don't have a right to say it. Like Michelle said there, do we have a right? We're white. We don't have a right because we're white. There's the new chant, right? Rest Stop, thanks for joining us on Podbean. We missed you last week, by the way, just so you know. Sorry, I haven't responded to you yet. I had the screen blocked with that thing. I felt like there's nothing I could say that she didn't just really hit. And I'm telling you, the left-wing anarchists, anti-Americans are going to tear that video apart. They're going to take pieces of it and play it out of context and make her look like just the worst person ever. But I'm telling you what, she is the kind of leader we need in this country. I hope I don't know, like I said, I never heard of her before a couple hours ago, but I hope she runs for president someday. There are lots of young minorities, females, African Americans, other Latinos running for Congress and seats. I've been following a lot of them on Twitter. And yeah, so Steve's not here with us, unfortunately. Still not here yet. I'm guessing he's probably not going to show up now that we are almost halfway through. I was hoping he would show up. If you're listening, you can call us at 330-474-9833 if you have an opinion on this. If you're listening on Podbean as well. If not, I do have another short one I'm going to play here in a minute that kind of hits home. It's funny. A lot of discussion on YouTube has been about what we're watching on TV and stuff. I know that a lot of people listening to the show aren't interested in politics, and I try not to get too crazy in politics. But this was obviously this is a pretty major thing going on in the country that's part of a larger thing. You know, like I said, I've always been a student of history, and large major events, large wars, large things don't just pop up out of nowhere. They are always a part of something bigger. The Civil War was 100 years in the making. 100 years the Civil War was. A lot of people I've heard say, well, we're headed towards a race war. We're headed towards the next Civil War. No, probably highly unlikely. Highly unlikely that this would ever turn into any kind of race war, because I believe that a vast majority of people of both races know what's going on. They understand reality, because you really got to be closed-minded and really set on one thing for you, and for you to not be able to see what's really going on. And I believe people of both, a majority of white people and black people, understand what's going on. I think it's a very small minority of people that are participating in these riots. I know a lot of people are protesting because they feel like that's what they need to do, and that's fine. And I believe that our governments and our cities and states have tried to bend over backwards to allow people to protest, but not burn the cities down. Now, these young African-American men that are out in the streets looting and burning places down, I believe they're being swayed by anarchist groups like Antifa and left-wing anti-American people who predominantly reside in the Democratic Party. Now, are all Democrats anti-American? Of course not. Of course not. That's silly. Are there people? There's so many people in this country that hate Donald Trump so much that they would do absolutely anything to get him out of office? Yes, I believe there are people in high places of power that would do anything, literally anything. Do I think that the riots were staged for that purpose? Probably not. Do I think groups and people have taken advantage of George Floyd's death to further their cause? Absolutely, 100%. If you don't think that, you're just not paying attention. You're not thinking. Every major conflict on this planet between humans always comes down to two different ideologies that both sides believe is 100% correct. And what happens is, what always happens in history that leads to the conflict coming to a head is propaganda from both sides, convincing both sides that they are right enough to fight and die for it. I mean, you don't have Nazi Germany without propaganda. There's no way a whole nation of people sit back and let millions of people of another race be exterminated unless they've been brainwashed and propagandized to the point where they're okay with that, or gets to the point where they have no choice but to submit to it. Do I think we are headed in the direction of another war, of race war, all that stuff? No, I don't think we are yet. In 50 years, in 100 years, could it happen? We are seeing the early birth labor pains of something like that, yes. The only reason why this wouldn't turn into an all-out war now is because it's not regional. Our first Civil War was a regional difference in opinion, which caused one region to say, well, we just don't want to be part of this anymore. And the other region said, well, yes, you're going to stay a part of this, whether you like it or not, and we're going to militarily force you to do that. So, all of this comes down to one thing. Like I just said, propaganda. What she said in that video about police brutality against African Americans, I believe is 100% correct. I believe a lot of people, when they see a black man being killed by a white police officer or officers, or being mistreated in any way, whether he dies or not, and regardless of what that black man did, if he's a criminal or whatever, the problem with what we're doing, with what the propaganda does, is now all of a sudden we are determining what that officer's heart is saying. We have determined that this guy, I'm not even going to say his name because I can't ever remember it because I don't care what his name is, the officer. We are determining that he killed George Floyd because George Floyd was black. No one will even consider, especially after all the propaganda and all the stuff that's come down in the last week, no one will even talk about whether George Floyd died because that officer and those officers were not well trained, or they just made a big mistake. In other words, if that exact same scenario had went down with a white person, say it was the exact same scenario, and that white person died because of the poor actions of the police officers, none of this would have happened. none of these riots would have happened. And I'm not saying, again, if you heard what I said before the video, African Americans have suffered greatly in this country at the hands of white people. But the systemic racism is a lie. There's no systemic racism. Yes, there's racism. There will always be racism. You cannot get rid of racism ever. There will always be people that think another race is inferior or that they are better, because humans do that with each other. If all of a sudden tomorrow every single person on the planet became the same race, we would still have problems because we like conflict. We do the conflict thing very well. So our problems wouldn't be about race. They would be about something else. They would be about economic situation. They would be about whatever. Anyone who's older than 20 years old should know every time you're in a group of people, they could be all exactly the same as you. There'll be a problem. There'll be issues. It's human nature. So race is an easy one for us to point out and take advantage of. Almost every race on the planet has been enslaved at one point. Think about that. Every race on the planet has been enslaved by someone else at some point in the history of humanity. There are still people who are enslaved on this planet. You know that, right? There are people who are still enslaved on this planet. Our American tryst with slavery, which didn't start in America, we brought it here, was horrific, unexcusable. And we have paid for it over and over again. 625,000 Americans paid for it in their lives during the American Civil War. Yes, half of them were trying to keep slavery, but half of them were trying to abolish slavery. And we could get into the politics and all that about the Civil War and whether white people wanted black people to be free or not. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter because they still all died because of our sin of slavery. And like I said, some of the worst things we did, some things that were even worse than slavery, were the things that happened well after the Civil War. African Americans didn't have any rights until 100 years after emancipation. And again, that's all heartbreaking. But you know what else is heartbreaking? Watching David Dorn, a 77-year-old black American man who served his community as a police officer and a police chief and retired, be murdered on Facebook by people of his race because he was trying to stop them from breaking the law, from stealing. That's heartbreaking. At least 6 that I know of, African Americans, have been killed in these riots, and Black Lives Matter isn't talking about them. None of them were criminals that I know of. I don't know all about them. I know a young African American girl was killed. Some of them, at least 4 of them, were killed by other rioters of their same race. I think 2 were accidentally killed in the riots, which is no consolation to their families. No one's going to make a mural to David Dorn's. Maybe they will, but it isn't going to be like George Floyd. And that young lady in her speech about this man as a criminal, and the African American community is upholding him as someone. It's this what's going on right now is only hurting African Americans. That's it. And there's people that believe that police brutality against African Americans is a real thing and that it's really going on. And you know what? There's hundreds and hundreds of police forces across this nation that are all run independently of each other, run by different people in different parts of the country that deal with different things. So is there a police force in this country that may target African Americans? It's possible, but it's highly unlikely. When you're talking about large cities with large African American populations of young men whose fathers are absent, whose mothers are doing the best they can, but don't have the time or the the strength or the money or whatever to take care of their sons and raise them right, they're the ones out in the street in these riots, and they're the ones that are being encouraged by anarchist, anti-American groups like Antifa to do what they're doing, and they're falling into a trap. Anchor says, I love that Chuck says he's not going to focus the show on this. 45 minutes later, he's still talking about it. Did I say I wasn't going to focus the show on it? Because in my mind, I thought the whole show was going to be about it, so I may have misspoke. So what do we do now? What's the answer? What do we do? Well, I don't know that there's anything I can do. Somebody said to me just today, well, you could be nice to, I'm paraphrasing greatly, you could be nice to someone who's oppressed, an African American. And I said, I don't know any African Americans who are oppressed. I don't know. And my whole life, I've never treated anyone differently because of their race. And I'm not saying I'm this person who doesn't see race. Sure, I see race. How do you not see race? Anyone who says I don't see race is full of it, and don't listen to anything else they say. Because we all see race. It's how we treat someone. And are there still white people in this country that would treat an African American poorly solely on that fact? I'm sure there are. But our system has evolved from the point of slavery to Jim Crow to the no civil rights, to a point where when I was born, African Americans were still in oppression. They were only 5 years into having any rights. And I've seen America change from oppressing black people to systematically, governmentally trying to help them, trying to make it to where a boss can't discriminate against you. We have laws, we have things in place from the system to help African Americans. And they deserved it, and it's the least we could do. Because what else can we do? You can't make people not be racist of any race. But you can make laws that they can't do what, practice their racism in the workplace. Now I want to play another quick video. This is only a couple minutes. This I found to be interesting because it comes back to what I think I said earlier about you have all these white people out there protesting. And you're going to hear an African-American woman tell a white woman who's protesting what she thinks about it. And I believe she sounds like she's from Jamaica, but she's definitely African-American. She's definitely lived in this country for a while. So let's take a listen to this real quick. Over here. Where's the audio? I turned it down.
Where is the Black Lives Matter in Chicago? Where are they? When black people kill black people, they don't come out and do this crap. The only time they do this crap is when a white person touches them. They're the racists. They are the racists. Because white cops, it's wrong for a white cop to kill a black person, that's for sure. But if it matters, it should matter at all times.
So what are you fighting for? What are you fighting for? You are not here to fight injustice. You're here to cause drama.
Message will be stop violence. It's not about blacks.
In a unicorn world. That's not a unicorn world.
Period.
Okay, since you're so...
You guys think blacks are oppressed. I am black. I'm not oppressed. I am free.
That's good for you. That's an individual person. What about a systemic issue?
Where? I am black. I've always wanted to be. I have I do what I want. You have the skills. This is a country where you have the skills. You want to do what you want. You do it. Stop forcing on people to accept that they're oppressed. They are not. I am not oppressed. I am black. Stop making people accept that they're oppressed. You're forcing a rhetoric into your minds, which is not true. That's my point. Okay. Violence is wrong, period. It's not about blacks.
Of course.
You agree that whites kill whites too, right? Have you seen any white person coming out and saying white life matter or white thing? No, violence is wrong.
They literally do all the time. Every time there's a Black Lives Matter
It's a
protest,
violence problem.
a white
It's not
person.
a black problem. It's a violence problem. The blacks kill blacks in black neighborhoods every single day. I've never seen a Black Lives Matter in those neighborhoods. Never. Never. You know what they say? When a black person kill a black in a black neighborhood, they come out and they say, when the police comes, you know what they tell the police? Snitches get stitches.
I know that.
Snitches get stitches. But if a white person kill a black person, Black Lives Matter. Stop the hypocrisy. Nobody takes this seriously. Nobody. If it matters, it should matter in black neighborhoods. You start cleaning at home.
So why don't you go?
You
Why don't
start
you
the
start?
case at home.
Why don't you start?
I'm not carrying anything
Why
saying
don't
Black
you
Lives
start?
Matter. I
Why
know I
don't you start?
matter.
Why don't you start?
You guys are wasting everybody's time. Okay?
Since you're so
Black
enlightened
kills
about
black
this,
more than any race. Where's the Black Lives Matter?
people kill in their community.
Where's the Black Lives Matter? I am free. Don't try to make me believe I'm not free.
So there's another African American expressing her opinion that I believe is correct. I'll leave you with this. I was talking with a young African American man the other day, yesterday I believe it was, and he described, and he's very, what's the word I'm looking for? I don't know. He's a smart guy, very smart, very intelligent. He said he felt that there was systemic racism and that there was a problem with police targeting black people. And of course I said, well, I'm not going to, I don't know that that's true. I don't think it's true, but I'm certainly not going to tell you you're wrong because you're black. You're black in America and you would know. But then he described the one scenario where he had a confrontation with law enforcement when he was much younger, in which he was just with the wrong group of people. And it was a very minor thing, which is irrelevant. But it wasn't any kind of violent thing. But he described the scenario and he described how he felt targeted and because he was black. But the scenario he described, I lived through at least a half a dozen times in my life. Maybe not that many, but more than once. I've been in that exact same scenario that he described, and I felt the same way he felt. So is he buying into the propaganda that the way he felt was because he was black? Because then, you, like I said, then now you have to go into the mind and the heart of the police officer. Is he doing this because the person is black? Or is he just doing it because he's trying to do his job? And that's a whole nother issue. If this keeps up, we're going to have a shortage of police officers in this country because no one's going to want to be a cop. No one. Or at least the percentages will go way down. Think about those 3 police officers that are now going to be charged with some type of crime because they didn't stop what happened. They didn't stop what happened because they thought they were doing what they're supposed to do, and that's a whole other issue we don't know anything about their training, about the Minneapolis police policies. But now their lives are ruined, most likely because what? Because they wanted to protect and serve? Because they wanted to be a part of the community? And they weren't all white, so the race issue is kind of out the window when you're talking about those other 3. So Steve doesn't talk much about this kind of thing. Steve's very not into talking about race, and I appreciate that about Steve. I appreciate the fact that if we just, I've always said, if we would just stop talking about race and stop pointing it out so much that there's a difference, things might get better. But I understand we couldn't do that 40 years ago, but maybe we can do it now. But anyway, so I did get on my soapbox a little bit, but again, I'm a middle-aged white guy. I could be completely wrong. There could be systemic racism going on against black people by police around the country, but man, all the facts don't point to that. Like she said, yes, I'm sure there are police officers who do wrong things. And there might be a police officer that does something wrong to a black man because he's black. So all we can do is try and weed them out, right? That's, again, I'm going to end with, what do we do? What can we do? What can be done? You could riot and burn down everything in the country, and what does it change? You can't, if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. I'm sure you've all heard that. So I guess we all have to reflect on ourselves and our daily lives and do whatever we can to help change it. I feel like tonight on this show, I played videos from 2 African Americans expressing their opinion. Maybe I should have looked up some videos of opposite opinions, but I feel like, especially the first one, she nailed it. I believe the African American community has been duped. They've been duped by people in this country who do things politically that keep black people oppressed, but they propagandize it and sell it like they're helping, and they're not. We have decades of democratic rule in large cities in this country that have blown up into this. And yet people still say that they're the solution. And that what conservatives say are wrong, because people have been indoctrinated and propagandized into believing that the right-wing conservative ideas are racist. And they're not. They're just not. So anyway, thanks for listening. We'll be back next week. Steve will be with us. And we will talk about something much more lighthearted if there's internet. You know, it's 2020. You know, so there might not even be internet by next Wednesday. And if there's not, oh well, we'll see you whenever. Thanks for listening. You've been listening to The Chuck Jones Show. Go to chuckjonesshow.com to listen, download, stream, and subscribe. This podcast is available on iHeartRadio, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, and anywhere you listen to podcasts. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at Chuck Jones Show. We're live every Wednesday at 7 p.m. Eastern in the United States. You can join us on the Podbean app. Until next time, adios, amigos. Thanks for listening, guys, on YouTube. We're still live on YouTube, still live on Facebook. Thank you, Facebook listeners. Gloria, thank you so much. See you next week. So CK Reviews showed up there at the last second. Thanks a lot, Steve-O. Steve-O. All right. See you next week, guys. Appreciate it.